Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, as Michigan fans ourselves, this Michigan season in 2024, a couple words come to mind like disappointing, unacceptable. Like what we just saw against Illinois Saturday afternoon was, since the COVID year, that's about as frustrated as I have been watching a Michigan football game. Now, there's a lot of problems going on within this Michigan program, but I think you want to start with having the conversation about Sherrone Moore. Like, what do we need to see from Sherrone Moore going forward the rest of 2024 and into the offseason to kind of gain some confidence that he's the right man for the job as the head coach at Michigan? Because at the end of the day, a lot of Michigan fans expected some sort of drop off from the 2023 year, right? You lose a quarterback to a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. You lose pretty much your whole coaching staff and your whole offensive line, 6 offensive linemen that played a lot of football. There was always going to be some sort of drop off. And I think a lot of Michigan fans understood that. But the level of drop off that we're seeing in 2024 kind of makes you scratch your head. So I want to get into what do we need to see from Sherrone Moore? What needs to change within this Michigan program? Evaluate some other coaches on the coaching staff as well. We're going to have the quarterback conversation as well. We're going to talk about true freshman Jadyn Davis. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Michigan fans, y'all heard me Saturday afternoon that was a little bit of a rant post-Illinois game. 72 hours removed, a little bit more composed, but I still got some problems I want to talk about. For the Michigan fans, let it fly in the comment section. Y'all have shown a ton of support to the boys. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. But again, more importantly, Dill, we don't agree. I'm sure there's going to be many Michigan fans that see it in so many different ways. And quite frankly, you can look at this program from a lot of different ways and have opinions that make a lot of sense. So let it fly in the comment section. Dill, I'm going to open it up to you about Sherrone Moore. Let's start with the evaluation of Sherrone Moore as a head coach through the midway point of the 2024 season.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like very limited sample size. It's not been good, but I think he's doing what he needs to do on the recruiting trail. And that to me is a big thing I feel like a lot of Michigan fans are ignoring is how kind of much recruiting slipped in the last couple of years of Harbaugh with the will he, won't he with the NFL. You look, they didn't bring in a quarterback. That's clearly the 1A problem, if you will, for this Michigan team. But just generally, I mean, they weren't even in the top 15 in those last 2 classes. You look if you're going to be a sustainable winning program, I don't think you can rely on being necessarily exactly what Michigan was, which was a really veteran, really well-developed team that a lot of those guys came from 3-star ranks, like the Mike Sanderson, the Rod Moores. Again, there's a reason Georgia, Alabama at the height of their powers, they recruit top 5 classes year in and year out, and that's what works. I think that's built more sustainable. So I look at this year, I don't think he was coming in with much of a shot to be particularly good, especially because he couldn't really hit the transfer portal because they went too deep into January in the season.
So I agree with that. And again, as Michigan fans, maybe we got a little bit too optimistic here in some of the offseason reports about what this Michigan team looked like during fall camp. At the end of the day, this is a new head coach who, again, I get he was an interim head coach when Jim Harbaugh was suspended, but that doesn't prepare you from the day in, day out operations of being a head coach. And you can tell that Sherrone, this is a big job, and you can tell there's an adjustment period for Sherrone Moore that a lot of Michigan fans certainly should have expected. Now, I'm not going to necessarily play devil's advocate, but for the Michigan fans who are frustrated, including myself, I think it comes down to you watch this football team play every Saturday, specifically that Illinois game coming off of a bye. It just seemed like they weren't prepared to play football, specifically on the offensive side of the football. That's what's most concerning for a lot of Michigan fans, where you had a really tough loss on the road at Washington. You were dealing with some injuries, clearly didn't play your best football. You have an off week. You come out and you make no mistake about it. Yeah, Michigan has a quarterback problem. This is a much more talented team than what they played against Illinois, and they just didn't look like it. They came out just not ready to play, and that, to me, kind of falls on the head coach. I mean, coming off a bye, looking like that, I do think that's
my issue is just ready to play. It's you have 3 quarterbacks who are just so wholly inept. I don't think you can be competitive on the offense side of the ball ever. The fake punt's probably the one disappointing thing, just not being prepared to deal with that at all. But I don't know exactly. And you want to talk about a hot seat. I think Kirk Campbell's the guy who really should be on the hot seat. But I look with the quarterback play that's here right now, I just don't really know that I'm ready to sell out everything on Chiron Moore, who I genuinely think was such a huge part of that build up back to where Michigan was, where they just capped off a 15-0
And
national
I
championship.
think to round it out, there's a lot of Michigan fans that are frustrated with you didn't go grab a quarterback in the transfer portal, knowing damn well what you had on the roster. And I can see that frustration, but you made a really good point. I think it was last night when we were just talking, said, well, Michigan played in the national championship. By that time, when Michigan won a national championship, most of the good quarterbacks that were in the transfer portal during that winter portal window were already committed and enrolled practicing with their new schools. And then in the spring practice, that's where I can kind of see Michigan fans' frustrations, where you went through 16 spring practices in a spring game and you still felt like you had a quarterback that you could win with. Now, the conversation is there ain't that many good quarterbacks that are in the spring transfer portal window, so you kind of understand why Michigan maybe wasn't aggressive there. Let's go to Kirk Campbell, because again, I think Sherrone Moore, it's like I don't think a lot of Michigan fans are quite ready to call for his head, but you got to see him make significant changes with this roster in the offseason. Kirk Campbell's kind of where my frustration lies in the most. One, he's been the quarterback's coach for Michigan before he took the OC job, so he was in charge of developing guys like Davis Warren, like Jad Tuttle, like Alex Orji. That development seems to have not worked at all. But my biggest frustration is still, I get quarterback play is very, very bad, but what's the sign of a really good offensive coordinator? Is an offensive coordinator that can design an offense and lean into your quarterback strengths. Now, granted, that's not many with these quarterbacks. There seems to be no identity or no scheme that they can go to have consistent success within this Michigan offense. They've tried all three quarterbacks. Nothing has really worked. And I think my biggest frustration is how bland this offense is. And just there's no explosiveness or identity. Then you look at Kirk Campbell's background and say he was an analyst at Penn State. He was the offensive coordinator at Old Dominion for 2 years, got fired from that position, joined Michigan as an analyst, moved up to quarterbacks coach. Now is the offensive coordinator with a very limited track record that in fact, the track record for Kirk Campbell as an OC is not very good. That's kind of what leads me to think, all right, Kirk Campbell, I'm not sure if he's the right man for the job to be running this Michigan offense.
And frankly, similar to what Sherrone Moore did hiring Wink Martindale, like that's like almost like a head coach kind of next to you. Like that's not a guy who's taking a big back seat to a lot of people in experience and like kind of understanding what he's going to be about. Kirk Campbell, like you kind of said it, just is wildly unproven. And Sherrone Moore is not Lincoln Riley. I don't think that's why he got hired to be Michigan. I don't think that's why he's going to be a head coach or a really good head coach if it works out here at Michigan. Like he's not an offensive genius. I don't necessarily think. I don't ever think like, man, he really dialed up some craziness on offense. He does a really good job developing culture, tough football teams, tough units, I should say, at least in terms of what he did with that offensive line. So I think he needs like a real home run offensive coordinator hire who's not just kind of I'm just going to elevate him for the sake of continuity, because I think right now is proving that they don't really. I think you kind of said it. Like, I don't care how bad the talent is right now. Michigan's talent is better than teams like Fresno State in those early games they were playing, like an Arkansas State or whatever team that was. Like, they're better than those teams. They're far more talented, and you still didn't see anything really happening with the offense. Like, they didn't have anything that, man, he's really kind of put together a drive that really worked here. So everything was pretty much, well, Clell Mullings rips off a big play. Michigan does good on a drive. If he doesn't, there is no answer. So I think at the end of the day, there's no real excuse for him to have the offense looking as bad as it is. And I am the first to blame these quarterbacks. I think it's been beyond atrocious in terms of what they've done. At some level, like when you're
But
playing,
again, like you talk about quarterback play, like who's for the last 2 years, who's been in charge of developing these quarterbacks, all of which who've been with the program for the last 2 seasons. It's been
But
Kirk
my
Campbell.
issue is like they just didn't recruit that guy. They didn't like again. These weren't 4-star quarterbacks. So guys who I think Michigan should be recruiting and bringing in, like the Brady Harts of the world. They just weren't able to recruit anyone because at the end of the day, with what Harbaugh was doing, it was really, really hard, I think, to sell to a quarterback who, frankly, when Michigan was kind of like in their buildup, Harbaugh was a big reason why quarterbacks were coming to that school anyway. So I look like I can kind of excuse the quarterback play to an extent. Not totally, because I don't think he's done a good, like obviously not done a good job, but I just like look at what he's got planned for the offense. There just doesn't really seem to be
Yeah,
any.
that's I think the at least my biggest frustration is just there's no real plan. Like we're just throwing stuff against the wall and hoping it sticks. And like you said, the only success we have is when Clell Mullings is a hero and makes it happen. I think the second conversation is then like what kind of offensive coordinator, and if there is a coaching staff change, which I really do think there should be, because I feel like you just can't run it back. What kind of offensive coordinator should Sherrone Moore be looking at? Dill, to me, it's an offensive coordinator with a proven track record, a guy that's been around the block countless amount of times. Because again, I think the biggest problem with Sherrone Moore, he's a young head coach that is kind of learning on the job, and he was given the keys to a Michigan football program that's one of the most rich historic programs that we see in the country. This is a big, big job for a guy that's never been a head coach before. So I wouldn't mind seeing an offensive coordinator that, might have been a head coach in the past and is a proven very, very good schematic schemer of offenses. And we'll get into that conversation when that conversation
I
comes
want
around.
somebody who needs to be paid $1.5 million to $2 million, like kind of what Wink Martindale's getting paid. You obviously have a reason Kirk Campbell's making well below that, and it's because he doesn't necessarily command that type of money. It's got to be someone who it's a big name, it's a big hire, it's a Dana Holgerson, something like that, where it really kind of perks your ears up. A Brennan Marion from UNLV. Again, a guy who I think is going to be highly coveted because they've shown now that they can really build an offense year in and year out, not just if they have a really good quarterback, but over a handful of years. And I think that Kirk Campbell, at the end of the day, he's not really that guy. He has a
Yeah,
proved
and that's kind of where I'm at too. And we'll probably get into that more if indeed we're looking for an offensive coordinator over the next
better.
couple
We
months.
better be looking for a new coach too. And I'm not a
Yeah.
fire coach, but if this offense stays intact, we'll be very disappointed, I think.
So looking at the next coach that I want to evaluate, well, actually, let's stick on the offensive side of football and let's talk about Ron Bellamy. I know you don't necessarily agree, and a lot of Michigan fans disagreed with my take a couple weeks ago in terms of it's really hard to evaluate these wide receivers with the offense and quarterback play looking like this. And I do understand that, but at the end of the day, you look at some of these numbers and say, this is really concerning. We got one from a talent acquisition standpoint. There's only one 4-star wide receiver in this Michigan wide receiver room. That's if you follow the sport of college football, it starts with talent acquisition. You need the dudes in the wide receiver room. Michigan has one 4-star, Tyler Morris, who has kind of underperformed this year. I think secondly, you start looking at only 2 wide receivers have more than 10 targets on the year. We've only completed 6 passes of 20 plus yards. The wide receivers are a no-show in this offense, and I think it's a combination of one, Ron Bellamy not getting it done on the recruiting trail, and I get he brought in Andrew Marsh, but I think two,
I also think, frankly, you're being a little short-sighted of the Bellamy because he was coaching safeties for some big portion of his Michigan year. So that was
one
really
year.
his first crack at it. Now, again, he's brought in an Andrew Marsh. I kind of like how the wide receiver recruiting shaping up in 2025. So again, I get that maybe you can throw some shade, but I look at how Roman Wilson played last year. I thought he developed into a kind of a really, really good player. I mean, what is he, a 3rd-round draft pick? I thought Cornelius Johnson played solid football for Michigan. So I think that'd be really kind of early to pull the trigger on Ron Bellamy just because it's A, he hasn't had a ton of time to work with this room. B, Andrew Marsh is a big, big get. That's a fact that he could convince that type of wide receiver to come to Michigan after the last 4 or 5 years or however many years it's been is very, very impressive. So I am much more comfortable giving him a bit more of a leash because I like the way things are going. I thought again, you saw Smaj Morgan play good football last year. You saw even Tyler Morris, frankly, played good football. Those guys were playing good football when they were in an offense that was conducive to playing decent football. I just think you look right now, I don't put any of this on Ron Bellamy and the receivers. I put it 100% squarely on quarterback play and on Kirk Campbell.
All right, number 3, Wink Martindale, defensive coordinator. This one I'm not
Hard.
I got one singular problem with Wink Martindale, and that is one, I really do think the expectation for this Michigan defense was a little bit higher than what we're seeing. But I do understand, when you are opposite of an offense like this, it's really hard to put up really good numbers. The one issue I see is Wink Martindale was brought in to be this ultra aggressive defensive coordinator that allowed the defense to, go out and win Michigan football games. I think that's why we brought in Wink Martindale. Hey, we're going to need to win games on the defensive side of the football. We're going to need to be aggressive. We're going to need to be creating turnovers. 1.1 turnovers per game forced for this Michigan defense that's 92nd in the country. I don't think it's unfair to say he's underachieved with this defense. That being said, I'm not ready to yank Wick Martindale out of there? Because we've seen this in the past. Like there were some growing pains year one with Mike McDonald. You kind of continue that defense with Jesse Minter. It gets better. So I'm willing to give Wink Martindale year 2 and year 3 to see if he can really get this defense kind of back humming what we saw in 2023.
Now, I was trying to hold my tongue through your little soliloquy on Wink Martindale. Like, I will not hear a single thing. The only thing I think maybe you can say about Wink Martindale is that Washington game. I don't think that was a well-called game. I thought they were
No.
blitzing way too much. You look, I mean, our front four was unblockable for that Washington offensive line. So the fact that we were blitzing and leaving corners one-on-one and they weren't making tackles, I found quite frustrating. But aside from that, I look like there's been so many high-impact plays from that defense. I mean, pick sixes. They won that USC game. They won that Illinois game. That's just like pathetic by the offense. I look at those numbers, and half of those were on the fake punt, I think, for that rushing stat. So I look like, again, they've really been shut down for most of the year. And Illinois is a pretty good offense. Like, I don't think they're the most explosive in the world, but they execute and they move the ball at a high level. I don't get any of this Wink Martindale hate. I think he's done a really good job. Again, the secondary had to turn some pieces over. Hasn't been wildly healthy. You still look, that defense has kept them in every football game, and that's with the literally the worst offense in the Power 4 level. And I don't even know if it's like close.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm not ready to get after Wink Martindale like maybe some people are in the comment section. Now, last conversation, quarterback conversation. Maybe should have started with this, but we'll close on this. Yeah, I'll put you on the hot seat first. Like, up to you. You're Kirk Campbell for the next week, and you're going into this Michigan State game. Who are you starting at quarterback?
And I don't think it's going to happen, but I just don't see why you don't go with Jadyn Davis at this point. I'm so sick of watching these other guys play. They're playing all have made losing plays. No one's really stepped up and shown any real, like, oh man, we can win with that. Like, it's all been untenable. I look, again, Jadyn Davis, like, at some point you're going to need to know if he's ready to rock and roll. I think you made a good point. Like, we need to know if this guy is the guy or if they need to go hit the portal or recruit 2 quarterbacks in 2025 or all those kind of things you need to think about. Because I don't see any of these 3 on the roster next year, frankly. And if they are, then I don't want to be part of it. Because I don't want to.
That's the question, right? Is Alex Orji, Davis Warren, Jack Tuttle? Do you think either 3 of those? I mean, Jack Tuttle can. He's got to go get a job. Alex Orji, Davis Warren, they have eligibility remaining, but I'd be very surprised if either of those quarterbacks are on this Michigan roster in 2025, which leaves you with Jadyn Davis, Carter Smith, and I think what you kind of said is exactly right. You got to know what you have with Jadyn Davis, and I think the only real way to know is letting him play some in 2024. And that kind of determines your approach in the transfer portal where, hey, you see Jadyn Davis really do some good things in this Michigan offense and say, we're probably still got to go to the transfer portal market and grab some sort of quarterback because you don't want to just rock with a redshirt freshman and a true freshman in your quarterback room. But maybe we don't need to go after a top 10 quarterback in the transfer portal. If Jadyn Davis is like, hey, we definitely need another year, then you got to go big game hunting for a quarterback in the transfer portal. But at least you have
the future. But I also, like, for the sake of my sanity, I don't want to see those 3 back on the field. Like, even just for my enjoyment right now, I'm so sick of watching this quarterback play. It's so hopeless. It's so depressing. And it's not even depressing anymore now. It's just like infuriating. Like, I watched Jack Tuttle make the same play he made the game before in Washington and fumble like that ball. It's like, it's insane what I feel like we're watching. I just don't have any answer. I don't think that, like, who wants to watch any of these 3 quarterbacks? At least give us something to hope for, because at this point,
that would be from like
what it is. Like, it can't be worse than what you got with these 3.
From a selfish standpoint, I'm kind of with you. Like, you want to see
my sanity.
You just want to see, you just like what Michigan fans like getting excited to watch Davis Warren trot out there, Alex Orji, Jack Tuttle. I just don't think any Michigan fan would want to see that. No, I think the counter conversation is, you want to throw Jadyn Davis out in this offense, like the young quarterback that we think has a bright future within this Michigan offense. This is, again, I don't necessarily agree with this take, but I understand this take is like, what is Jadyn Davis going to do in this offense? Like, we stink. We can't pass protect. We're running the football all right. Now, I think this is what you're going to say is, hey, if he's a good quarterback, he's going to figure it out, and at least we're going to show some life. That's probably would be my take as well. So I think from a selfish standpoint, I want to see Jadyn Davis. And I think it makes sense from a reasonable spot too. Like, we got to figure out what we have with Jadyn Davis before the end of the season, because that's going to dictate how we approach the transfer portal for a quarterback. I really think the move for Sherrone Moore, and whether that's against Michigan State or maybe you give him a couple more weeks. But again, I don't know if you want to be throwing him out there against like that Ohio
I was
State
going to say,
defense
this is
either,
the
or
week
Oregon.
you're going to do it, because I don't think you're playing a killer in Michigan State by any means.
Yeah, that's a very good point. If you were to do it, this would be the defense to kind of throw him out there and ideally find some confidence. Dill, we'll cut it there. Again, Michigan fans, let it fly in the comments section. A lot of different takes you can have about this program. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Going to be talking a lot of Michigan ball over the next couple weeks and months. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.